Elara queen and her servant escaped for love. The arrow pierced the midnight air just inches from Queen Elara's head, splintering against the ancient oak tree behind her. She didn't flinch. Her hand found Mira's trembling fingers in the darkness, and she squeezed them tight, silently promising what words could no longer convey. They had crossed the border of the kingdom an hour ago, leaving behind crown jewels scattered across the marble floor of the royal chamber, leaving behind a throne that had been Elara's birthright, leaving behind everything except each other. The forest around them whispered with the sounds of pursuit, horses thundering somewhere in the distance, torches flickering like angry fireflies through the trees. But Elara looked only at Mira, at the woman whose gentle hands had braided her hair each morning for 7 years, whose eyes held more kingdom than any land she'd ever ruled. Mira had been brought to the palace when she was barely 16, an orphan girl from the southern villages, assigned to serve in the queen's private chambers. Elara had been 23 then, newly crowned after her father's sudden death, weighted down by expectations and protocols and the constant pressure to marry a suitable prince from a neighboring realm. She remembered the first time she'd truly seen Mira, not as a servant but as a person. It was during a particularly brutal council meeting where old men had spent 3 hours debating which foreign king's son she should wed. Elara had returned to her chambers trembling with rage and helplessness, and Mira had been there quietly preparing her evening tea. The servant girl had looked up, and something in her dark eyes had understood everything, without a single word being spoken. That understanding had been the beginning. For years, they had hidden what grew between them behind the rigid walls of duty and propriety. Their love had bloomed in stolen glances across crowded throne rooms, in the brush of fingers when Mira helped her dress each morning, in whispered conversations late at night when the palace slept and they could finally be honest. Elara had learned every detail of Mira's face in candlelight, had memorized the sound of her quiet laughter, had discovered that true power wasn't holding dominion over subjects, but holding this woman's heart and being trusted with its fragility. They had kissed for the first time in the royal garden during a spring festival, hidden behind the blooming jasmine vines while musicians played and nobles danced nearby, completely unaware that their queen was discovering what it meant to finally breathe freely. But secrets in palaces have a way of unraveling like poorly sewn tapestries. Lord Garrett, the head of the royal council, had grown suspicious of why the queen refused every marriage proposal, why she kept the same servant in her private chambers. Year after year, when tradition demanded rotation of staff, he had begun watching, collecting whispers from other servants, building his case like a prosecutor preparing for judgment. 3 nights ago, he had come to Elara's chambers unannounced, pushing past the guards with the authority of his position. He had found them together, Mira's head resting in Elara's lap as the queen read poetry aloud, their hands intertwined in a way that left no room for innocent interpretation. The look on his face had been a mixture of disgust and triumph. The confrontation that followed had shattered the careful illusion Elara had maintained. For 7 years, Lord Garrett had demanded Mira be executed for the crime of corrupting the queen, for daring to touch royalty, for the unforgivable sin of their love. He had gathered the council in an emergency session, had presented his evidence, had called for immediate action to preserve the honor of the throne. Elara had stood before them, these men who had advised her father and now sought to control her, and she had made a choice that surprised even herself. She had removed her crown in front of the entire council, placed it gently on the velvet cushion of her throne, and declared that she would rather live as a peasant with the woman she loved than reign as a queen in a gilded prison. The council had erupted in chaos. Some had called her mad, others had attempted to physically prevent her from leaving, but Elara had walked through them all with Mira's hand in hers, their heads held high despite the insults and threats that followed them down the marble corridors. They had packed nothing except warm cloaks and a small bag of bread and cheese stolen from the kitchen by a sympathetic cook who had known Mira since childhood. By the time Lord Garrett had organized the royal guards to pursue them, they had already slipped through the secret passage beneath the eastern wall, the same passage Elara's ancestors had used during the siege wars, now repurposed for an escape motivated not by cowardice but by the bravest decision she had ever made. Now they ran through forests that grew denser with each mile, following the sound of a river they hoped would lead them to the northern territories where the old laws held less power. Mira stumbled over a root and Elara caught her, holding her close for a moment too precious to rush. In the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy, she could see tears streaming down Mira's face, carving clean paths through the dirt and exhaustion. The servant girl was crying not from fear but from overwhelming guilt, from the belief that Elara had sacrificed too much, that no love could be worth the loss of an entire kingdom. Elara wiped Mira's tears with her thumb, her touch as gentle as it had always been in the privacy of their stolen moments. She wanted to tell her that she understood now what her tutors and priests had never been able to teach her. That power measured in land and subjects meant nothing compared to the strength it took to choose love over duty, that every jewel in the royal treasury couldn't buy the wealth of waking up beside someone who saw you not as a crown but as a soul, that she had ruled a kingdom but had been a prisoner until Mira's love had shown her what freedom actually meant. But words seemed inadequate for such truths, so instead Elara kissed her. There in the dark forest with the sounds of pursuit growing closer, kissed her with all the passion and certainty and devotion that had been building inside her for 7 years. The kiss tasted of salt from tears and dirt from their flight and something sweeter than any wine, served at royal banquets. It was a kiss that proclaimed their truth to the universe even if the world refused to hear it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Mira's eyes had changed. The guilt was still there, but beneath it was something stronger, a determination that matched Elara's own. They continued running, hands clasped together so tightly their knuckles turned white. The river sound grew louder, and with it came new hope. There were stories of communities beyond the northern mountains, places where the old prejudices held less sway, where two women might build a life together without constantly looking over their shoulders. Elara knew the journey ahead would be impossibly difficult. She had been raised in luxury, educated in philosophy and statecraft, but never in survival. Her hands, which had held scepters and signed royal decrees, had never worked soil or built shelter. Mira knew more of practical living, but even she had spent her adult years within palace walls, protected by the very institution that now wanted to destroy them. Behind them, the shouts of the guards grew suddenly louder, more organized. Torchlight flickered through the trees, too close now for comfort. Elara's heart pounded, with a fear she had never known in any council meeting or political negotiation. Not fear for herself, but terror at the thought of what they would do to Mira if they were caught. The laws were clear and brutal. Servants who overstepped their bounds, especially in matters of the heart with their betters, faced punishments designed to serve as warnings to others. And Mira, who had committed the unthinkable act of loving a queen, would face the worst of it. They broke through the tree line and found themselves at the river's edge, the water rushing fast and dark before them. It was wider than Elara had hoped, the current stronger than seemed safe. But the voices behind them were growing closer with every second, and the choice between drowning and capture wasn't really a choice at all. Elara looked at Mira, saw her own determination reflected back, and together they waded into the freezing water. The current immediately pulled at their cloaks, trying to drag them downstream, but they held on to each other with desperate strength. The water rose to their waists, then their chests, and still they pushed forward. Every step a battle against the river's force. Halfway across, Mira lost her footing on the slippery rocks beneath. She went under for a terrifying moment, and Elara felt her heart stop completely. But then she had Mira's arm, was pulling her up, was wrapping both arms around her and refusing to let the river claim what the kingdom could not have. They struggled together toward the far bank, their expensive court clothes now waterlogged and heavy, their bodies shaking with cold and exhaustion. Behind them, the guards had reached the riverbank, but they hesitated at the water's edge, perhaps unwilling to risk their lives for a queen who had already abdicated, perhaps simply shocked that royalty would choose such a desperate escape. Elara and Mira dragged themselves onto the northern shore, collapsing together in the mud and grass. For a long moment, they simply lay there, holding each other and breathing, their hearts beating in synchronized rhythm. Across the river, the guards stood watching, their torches creating an orange glow against the darkness. Then slowly they began to turn away. Lord Garrett might want them pursued to the ends of the earth, but common soldiers had no appetite for chasing a former queen through hostile territory in the middle of the night. As the torches began to retreat, Elara felt something release in her chest. A tension she had carried for so long she had forgotten it was there. They walked through the remainder of the night, their wet clothes gradually drying in the pre-dawn air. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they reached a small village nestled in a valley. It was nothing like the grand cities of Elara's former kingdom, just a collection of modest homes and a few shops built around a central well. An elderly woman drawing water looked at them with curiosity but not hostility, taking in their fine but ruined clothes, their obvious exhaustion, the way they held hands like lifelines. The woman offered them bread and a place to rest in her barn, without asking questions. As they sat in the sweet-smelling hay, finally safe for the first time in days, Mira began to cry again. But these were different tears. Tears of relief and disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. Elara held her close, stroking her hair the way Mira had done for her countless times in the palace. And she realized that she had never felt more royal than in this moment. Not when she wore her crown, not when she sat on her throne, but here in a stranger's barn, holding the woman she loved, having chosen authenticity over authority. If this story has touched your heart, if you believe that love in all its forms deserves to be honored and celebrated, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that choosing love is never the wrong choice. Your engagement helps spread these stories of courage and truth to others who might be struggling with their own difficult decisions about authenticity and love. In the days and weeks that followed, Elara and Mira built a new life from nothing. They worked in the village. Elara learning to bake bread with hands that had once signed laws, Mira tending gardens with the same care she had once used to arrange flowers in the queen's chambers. The villagers slowly accepted them as Ella and Mira, two women who had escaped some unnamed trouble in the south, two women who clearly loved each other with a devotion that needed no explanation or justification. They lived in a small cottage on the edge of the village, with a garden they planted together and a cat that adopted them one rainy afternoon. Elara never spoke of her past as queen to anyone except Mira, but sometimes late at night, she would think about the kingdom she had left behind. She wondered if they had found a new ruler, if the council had placed some distant cousin on her throne, if anyone remembered the queen who had chosen love over power. She hoped that somewhere in her former realm, there might be young people who heard the story and found courage in it, who understood that the chains of duty and expectation could be broken. If you are brave enough to face the consequences, please comment below and tell us what choice you would make. Would you choose love over duty? Would you walk away from everything you've ever known for the person who holds your heart? Your stories and thoughts matter, and this community is built on sharing our truths with each other. 2 years after their escape, on a spring morning very much like the one when they had first kissed, in the royal garden, Elara and Mira stood together in the village square. The elderly woman who had first helped them, who they now knew as Helena, had offered to perform a blessing ceremony for them. It wasn't legal in any official sense, wouldn't be recognized by any kingdom or church, but it was real in the way that mattered most. As Helena spoke words about love and commitment and choosing each other every day, Elara looked at Mira and saw her entire universe reflected there. The servant girl who had become her savior, the quiet soul who had shown her what it meant to truly live rather than merely rule. When Helena invited them to seal their commitment, Elara cupped Mira's face in her hands, these hands that had learned to work and build and create rather than simply command. She kissed her wife in front of the assembled villagers, a kiss that held all the passion of their first stolen moment, but also something deeper now. The certainty of choice reaffirmed daily, the peace of authenticity, the joy of building something real together, rather than maintaining the beautiful illusion of a throne. The villagers cheered, and in that moment, Elara understood that she had not lost a kingdom. She had simply exchanged one kind of realm for another, a kingdom of two, built on honesty and sacrifice and the revolutionary act of choosing love when the entire world demanded something different. She was no longer a queen by title, but she was sovereign over her own life, in a way she never had been when wearing a crown and standing there with Mira's hand in hers, surrounded by people who accepted them simply as they were. Elara knew that some escapes aren't about running away from something, but running toward the only thing that ever truly mattered, toward love. toward freedom. Toward home,